And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will my new skull tattoo immediately get me free booze from the mean bartender at the dive bar? And could new COVID treatments be on the brink of FDA approval, or do they all just, quote, linger in penis? And now, the podcast host who will sleep in his shed as long as little Indy gives him snuggle-wuggles, Pete Dominic.
That is right. I tell Pico everything to make sure he has plenty of content. Unfortunately, Indy has been ignoring me lately. I don't know what is going on with her, but she's not been coming out to the shed after all summer. She was joining me out here, and now like school started and schedule changes, and I don't know, but she's not been coming out here at night, and I miss her. Another great intro, Pete Co. Thank you very much at Pete Co, C-O-E-V-O, at Pete Co V-O. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm sitting in the shed where I record the show from every day, and I made a drastic, major change, turning the garage into a hangout area for teens. The girls, they've been wanting me to do that for years, finally getting that done. So I gave them the futon that I've had in the shed that I nap on, and I built a little bed frame here in the shed. So major news, major change. It's going to be a very big lifestyle change for me, and I thought that you needed to know. And I'll show some pictures when it's all done. The shed really coming together, this 72 square feet of solar-powered podcast energy each and every day for you. I basically live in a tiny, tiny house, and I look out at the garden, and I do the podcast. And today, I outdid myself. I have two excellent guests joining me. Both of these conversations should win awards. Celeste Headlee has a new book out. It's all about how to talk about race and racism, and we had a wonderful conversation. I think you're going to really like that. We started about 32 minutes, and then one of my all-time favorite people and writers, one of the leaders of the New Nature movement. No one is more of an expert and has written more about children and their need for nature than Louv, and he's also, luckily for us, a good friend of mine because he joined me for a great conversation as well. Celeste Headlee, Louv, and you. Welcome to Stand Up. Thank you very much for joining me. If you aren't a paid subscriber, what the hell is wrong with you? What are you waiting for? Quit dragging your feet. You listen to the show, you freeloading son of a bitch. It's time to sign up. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just go to standupwithpete.com right now and sign up. And if you got a couple extra bucks you want to send our way, then you can always edit your pledge upward on Patreon. And a lot of you do that, and that's awesome. Welcome to new subscribers. Welcome to Stand Up, where each and every day talking with the smartest people I can find about all of the issues that matter to you as we try to navigate our way through an insane time, an insane timeline that we are in, folks. But that's why I join you each and every day to just try and figure it out with you, helping me. So many of you have become such good friends. If we haven't talked and you'd like to talk, let's do it. Let's set it up. Stand up with Pete at gmail.com. Lots to talk about in the news today. So let's do the news segment, which I call The Last 24. All right, let's start, as I tend to, with COVID news. First of all, COVID news. There you go. Thank you, Pete. COVID death toll in the U.S. has officially eclipsed the 1918 influenza pandemic estimates. The U.S. has recorded over 1 million pediatric cases. So children with COVID-19 over the past 5 weeks, the average number of deaths per day has risen to more than 1,500. And yet the Biden administration announced it would ease restrictions on travel to the U.S. in November, but you've got to be vaccinated is basically the case if you want to come into the U.S. The average 7-day cases are down 15%. Deaths are up 10% because, of course, we learned that's a lagging indicator from the governor of Minnesota, Tate Reeves, yesterday. Current hospitalizations are down 10%, and Dr. Anthony Fauci was on MSNBC yesterday with Hallie Jackson, who was giving him a hard time and demanding a date. And Fauci does not know when Halloween is. It's my birthday, so it was deeply offensive to me that Dr. Fauci doesn't know what day Halloween is, or maybe he was just trying to buy time. But here is a little of that conversation.
Administration, yourself and others, that you're confident about a vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11 this fall. Can you say with some level of confidence that you think there will be that vaccine available before Halloween?
You're trying to get me in trouble by pinning a date.
I'm not. I'm asking your level of confidence before Halloween.
I think Halloween's what, October 31st? Is that when it is? Yeah, I think there's a really good chance it will be before Halloween. Yeah.
Okay, and you're pretty confident about that.
It depends on what you mean by pretty confident. I believe there's a reasonably good chance that it will be.
Right. Would you support schools mandating the COVID vaccine for kids?
That's an interesting question. I know there's a lot of pushback against mandates, but I think we are in such an emergency situation with the 150,000 cases that we're having each day. The children now, you see the hospitals now, pediatric hospitals are filled with children who are infected and serious enough to be hospitalized. We need to put it into the context of what has gone on prior to COVID-19. People think that having children be required to get vaccination is a very novel thing. It isn't. Right now, if you want to go to many schools, most public schools, you've got to be vaccinated against measles, mumps, rubella, polio, hepatitis. So it's nothing new. So when you hear, would I be in favor of mandating? In fact, I would be, but that gets taken out of context, like I'm trying to impose some novel new restriction on somebody of taking away their rights. Look at what's been going on for decades in schools. Has been the requirement for vaccination. So it really isn't anything very new. Okay.
I assume that would be, really quickly, Dr. Fauci, after it gets full approval and not just emergency authorization, in your view?
Yes, okay. Of course. I want to make sure you do mandates. It's a fully approved vaccine.
All right, that's Hallie Jackson with Dr. Fauci yesterday on MSNBC. And the Recount, who I love that organization. Follow them on Twitter, run by my friend Slade Somer. They put together a great mashup of the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, doing his best to be entertaining while asking politely, insisting at times that his folks in West Virginia get vaccinated. He brings his French bulldog Baby Dog on his little office set when he does these daily entreaties about trying to get folks vaccinated. And the Recount just put together a mashup of him and his dog on his little set, holding it up and saying, doing it for Baby Dog. And, he should also insist on a mandate rather than just bring his bulldog on the set. But nonetheless, this is, I thought, entertaining.
I brought my little buddy with me, but I brought my buddy with me today. But I got to show you my little buddy just a second. Come and grab this rascal. Sit down there, rascal. Just calm down. You're good. You got to get vaccinated for Baby Dog. Baby Dog is asking you again to go get vaccinated. She's asking you, just go get your shot. You have got to get yourself vaccinated. All right, do it for Baby Dog. You can't turn her down. She'll give you a high five right now. She wants you vaccinated so badly. Now, she's probably right now thinking about a cheeseburger, but nevertheless, she's asking you, please, go get yourself vaccinated right now, right, baby? I've never seen her do anything except go through that little wiggling.
There you go. That's the governor of West Virginia. His name is Jim Justice, and he seems to me to be stoned out of his mind every day, but what do I know? Speaking of stoned out of your mind, that's the only way you can tolerate Tucker Carlson. So take a puff and listen to this, because this is some good shit right now. Tucker Carlson, who, of course, has gotten vaccinated, he's declaring that only men with low testosterone should get the vaccine. And also, he outs himself as not being a free thinker or a sincere Christian, and possibly a guy that loves Joe Biden. Are free thinkers and Christians the same? Anyway, listen to this amazing 20 seconds of his bizarre editorial last night.
But no, that would get the Democratic Party nothing. The point of mandatory vaccination is to identify the sincere Christians in the ranks, the free thinkers, the men with high testosterone levels, and anyone else who does not love Joe Biden, and make them leave immediately. It's a takeover of the U.S. military. Here's how they're doing it.
I won't play the rest, but he goes on some bizarre diatribe. It's just wild. How does he think of this stuff? Who writes it? Where does he come up with? Vaccines have been mandatory in the military forever. I mean, you got to get vaccinated for anthrax, for God's sake. But definitely we should be throwing anybody who's like a QAnon follower out of the military. I do kind of hope that there is some truth to what he's saying, that there's some kind of threshold, some litmus test, some bar that is too low, that if you believe the craziest shit, then I'm sorry, you don't get to drive the submarine. Sorry, Mike. I know you think that bathing in the blood of Jesus is going to protect you from COVID, and that's fine, but you can't drive the submarine anymore. I'm sorry, man. Yeah, you can get vaccinated. You can still believe what you want to believe, but you know what? Actually, you can't drive the sub anymore at all. All right, enough about COVID for today. Let's get to CNN. Anderson Cooper was talking to Jeffrey Toobin about this case out of Texas where a doctor came out and said he had performed an abortion since the new law went into effect. He wrote a piece in the Washington Post about it. Here's Jeffrey Toobin's analysis. And still, I don't know if Toobin was masturbating during this or not, but I thought it was interesting. So here it is.
One of the first legal challenges has come from someone who's on house arrest, another from a lawyer who has been disbarred. I mean, under this law, anybody can just make a complaint?
Well, this law, in many respects, is the worst nightmare of the anti-abortion forces, the people who behind this law, because it just underlines how ridiculous it is. I mean, you have this disbarred lawyer in Arkansas under house arrest filing one lawsuit, some random person in Chicago filing the other lawsuit. I mean, how and why they should be able to sue a doctor in San Antonio for doing something that is, at least at this moment, protected under the United States Constitution is just crazy. But it is apparently what this law allows. And what the advantage that Nancy Northrop and the other people who are defending Dr. Baird have is finally a judge will be able to say this law is unconstitutional because of the strange structure of the law. So far, including the United States Supreme Court, have basically thrown up their hands and said, well, there's not really a challenge here. It's premature, and they haven't ruled on the constitutionality. And this law is now depriving women of the rights that they are guaranteed into its third week. These lawsuits should finally get the question of whether the law is constitutional before a judge.
All right. Well, good analysis by Jeffrey Toobin there. It didn't sound like he was masturbating. So if he was, then, hey, good for him, because I wasn't picking up on that. So the other big news that I want to share some clips on is this Sunday, the Senate parliamentarian dealt a major setback to Democrats' plan to use the $3.5 trillion social policy bill, as the New York Times calls it, to create a path to citizenship for an estimated 8 million undocumented immigrants. And there's another immigration issue in the news, in that there are a whole bunch of Haitian folks that have come across the border in a Texas town. We'll talk about both those right now. First, here's the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on his disappointment on the ruling on this issue by the parliamentarian in the Senate.
Last night's ruling was extremely disappointing. It saddened me, it frustrated me, it angered me, because so many lives are at stake. But make no mistake, the fight continues. Senate Democrats have prepared alternative proposals. We'll be holding additional meetings with the parliamentarian in the coming days. I've worked very closely with my colleagues, including Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin, as well as our four Latino senators, Padilla, Menendez, Lujan, and Cortez Masto. And we're going to continue our fight with the best options available to provide immigrants with a chance of obtaining lawful residence.
And actually, like this reasoning, this argument here as well from Chuck Schumer, another quick clip.
The American people understand that fixing our broken immigration system is a moral imperative. It's also an economic imperative because immigrants are so important to our economy. Talk about shortage of workers. One of the main reasons is how Trump cut back on immigrants, both documented and undocumented. Immigration reform has been one of the most important causes of my time in the Senate. I will not stop fighting to achieve it.
And now here is my friend Erica Hill on CNN with Congressman Pete Aguilar. He's a Democrat, talking about what he is seeing happening in the Senate with this issue. And it sounds like they're cleaning out the Capitol in the background here, like someone's doing some work.
I also want to get your take on what we learned overnight, the Senate parliamentarian ruling that, immigration cannot be a part of this reconciliation package. So what then is the best path forward? Can you pull together bipartisan legislation?
Well, we would have to talk to the senators about that. I don't believe that Senate Republicans have indicated a willingness. In fact, they've been so anti-immigrant, I would doubt the ability to get 10 Republican votes on any type of immigration reform. What the parliamentarian ruled was on this specific question for a path to citizenship. There will be other questions that could be asked of the parliamentarian, but on this ruling, we understand that, we respect that, and we're confident at the end of the day that there can still be an adjustment to legal status for individuals in this country within reconciliation.
Pretty wild story happening at the southern border. Also, there are almost 15,000 Haitian migrants apparently under the Del Rio International Bridge waiting to be processed by immigration authorities as of Saturday. And Department of Homeland Security is ramping up deportation flights back to Haiti. Everybody's got an opinion about this. I still don't understand it. Quite what's happening and what should be done about it. It is a humanitarian issue, and that's how it should be seen. But don't let that stop Fox News and Jim Jordan from making all kinds of horrible statements in politics about it.
John, let's bring in Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, ranking member of House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, you've been extremely vocal on your Twitter feed about what is happening at the border, asking the question, where's Kamala Harris? And is this administration ignoring the crisis at the border? You were listening to Jen Psaki speaking from the White House briefing room a moment ago. Your reaction?
No, obviously they're ignoring it. We got 13,000 Haitians there in Del Rio, Texas. Obviously they're ignoring it. But I find it interesting. At the time when we have that, what does the Biden administration announce today? They announced that, for people who come here legally, foreign nationals, you're going to have to be vaccinated. And what is the Democrat Congress focused on doing? Trying to give amnesty to 8 million people who came here illegally. The American people are fed up with this. They'd like some leadership from the White House, from President Biden, from Vice President Harris, but they're certainly not seeing it. And it's because the White House is not willing to embrace the policies that work. A full implementation of Title 42, as Mr. Wolf was talking about, building the wall, going back to the Remain in Mexico policy, those policies that work, the White House won't embrace it because the hard left won't let them.
Oh, pile of bullshit from the top of Bullshit Mountain from Congressman Jim Jordan. The White House is doing, I think, probably their level best trying to manage this humanitarian situation, which is how it should be looked at. There's no need to score points. We could have a long, thoughtful conversation about immigration, and that's not going to happen on cable news. That's not going to happen in Congress, but it is going to happen on a program like mine. Who do you want to talk to about this issue? Always happy to have that guest on. All right, well, here is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas on this issue.
We certainly are experiencing a challenging situation, but we are surging resources, and we have a multi-pronged approach to this. We have, for example, worked with the American Red Cross to bring in supplies and much-needed resources to the population. We have worked with the World Central Kitchen to bring in meals for them. We've surged approximately 600 agents so that we can gain complete control of the individuals there. We are moving people, as has been noted, very rapidly to other processing centers to ensure their safety and security. We moved over 3,000 people in the last day and a half. We intend to move 3,000 people today. And, of course, we are increasing the frequency and size of the repatriation flights. We have sent a very clear message early on, in light of the fact that we are in the midst of a pandemic, that the border is not open and people should not take the perilous journey here. We are returning people to other countries.
So Jim Jordan said they were ignoring it. They weren't doing anything, but that's the Secretary of Homeland Security list with a long list of things that they are doing. Of course, these are complicated, nuanced conversations that need to happen to understand and get educated. These are human beings trying to escape a horrible situation and take advantage of whatever opportunities they can. And you know what? You do the same thing. That's what pisses me off the most. If you love your family, you would do the same thing. Okay, I've got two more clips for you. First, historian, documentary filmmaker Ken Burns on the podcast Smartless with Will Arnett. And here he is talking about today, the present day, being one of the worst times in American history, of course. This is the documentary filmmaker who made the most important documentary about the Civil War. This is some powerful shit. You're going to get triggered. You're going to get slightly depressed, maybe. And then I'm going to play a clip of the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, talking about submarines just because his accent will entertain you. Here's Ken Burns first.
You've been making films about the American experience and about America for the, whatever, it's been over 40 years. Do you have a cynical view now of where we're headed and where we've come from? Is it doom and gloom, or do you feel okay?
Well, I don't think anybody has the luxury at this moment of being cynical. Cynical's like just debauchery is just a luxury of too much time and too many things that you're not doing with your hands that you begin doing with your hands. Yeah. It's really serious. There are three great crises before this: the Civil War, the Depression, and World War II. This is equal to it. Mm-hmm. And it's the first time that we've got... Lincoln gave this great talk when he was very, very young to the Young Men's Lyceum on a Saturday afternoon, I think it was. And people will write in and tell you that wasn't a Saturday afternoon. It was an afternoon conversation about foreign policy. And he said, this is when he's like not even 29. He's a lawyer in Springfield. He said, "Whence shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall some transatlantic giant step the earth and crush us at a blow?" And then he answered his own question. "Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa could not by force take a drink from the Ohio River or make a track in the Blue Ridge in the trial of 1,000 years. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we will live through all time or die by suicide." And we're looking right down the muzzle of that gun.
I know you're probably thinking what I'm thinking, which is, do you think Ken Burns had that memorized, that Lincoln quote, or do you think he had it in front of him and he read it? I think he probably read it. You think he memorized it? Really? I don't think so. No one's that good. All right, finally, here is Boris Johnson trying to make friends with the French again after the UK and the US undercut a French deal to sell submarines that apparently were going to be obsolete to the Aussies to protect them against China, because we have a pivot from Europe to Asia, and it's all really interesting and very important. But apparently the French subs, they were too noisy, and the Chinese sonar would be able to hear them or something. Like the French subs were making too much noise. They were in the bottom of the ocean going, "Je t'aime, parlez-vous français, mangez là-bas," and you gotta have them be really, really quiet. Sorry, just trying to take your mind off that Ken Burns clip. Here's Bojo, Boris Johnson.
This is just a way of the UK, the US, and Australia sharing certain technologies because that is the sensible thing to do in the world in which we find ourselves. But that does not in any way mean that we wish to be adversarial towards anybody else or exclusive or crowding anybody else out.
All right, well, I'm sure everything's going to be just fine with the French over this stupid submarine story, which is not stupid at all. It's actually super important for a lot of different reasons, but it still feels stupid. I mean, submarines are amazing, but also horrific. So there's a lot to unpack with that. But now all I have time to unpack is the rest of the headlines. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the news dump. Rapid fire headlines. Pete Coe with a brand new jingle. Let's go.
Florida teenage surfer dude feels a great big chump. There's shark teeth indentations on today's news dump.
Oh, dear. It sounds like a surfer got chomped by a shark. That's terrible news. And there's a lot more where that came from, folks. Let's hit it. All right, let's start with news about climate change. Apparently, Bill Gates somehow raised like $1 billion to create clean energy. I don't know that story. I just remember that headline earlier. But I saw this headline. UN climate talks, faint progress on money, none on pollution. Officials are touting faint progress on money, but little on pollution at a United Nations World Leaders Summit on climate change. I'll continue to follow that story. Follow Brian Kahn at Earther. Follow Emily Atkin at Heated and whatever other climate reporters you like. Very important issue, of course. The most important issue, if you ask me. Oh, I saw this update I wanted to share with you that in Michigan, those guys that were going to try to kidnap and rape the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, well, a judge has set a trial for them, for 5 of them in the Michigan governor plot for March 8th. It's supposed to start. Ben & Jerry's has unveiled a new flavor, and it's in support of Congresswoman Cori Bush's public safety reform bill. It is called, the flavor was revealed Monday at an event at the National Press Club. They say the newest limited batch flavor, quote, supports the vision of the world in which every community is safe and everyone, including black and brown people, can thrive. It's called Change is Brewing, and apparently embodies Ben & Jerry's commitment to racial equality. The flavor features cold brew coffee ice cream with marshmallow swirls and fudge brownies, available in pints at some Ben & Jerry's shops. Sounds delicious. Quality. All right, so the Supreme Court announced that they would hear Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban case on December 1st, as anticipated. And in a related story, more than 500 women, female athletes, have filed an amicus brief against the Mississippi abortion law, though that's good. And a third related story, a majority now, according to a new poll, a majority of Americans oppose the Supreme Court's allowing Texas' 6-week abortion ban to take effect. Survey by Monmouth University also found that broad majorities of Americans oppose key components of the Texas law, with 7 in 10 saying they disapprove of a mechanism that empowers private citizens to enforce the abortion ban through civil lawsuits. So that's really good, and I'm happy to hear that news. I'm not happy to hear this news. New data shows that gun violence spiking in 2021. That's bad. Nation already recorded 14,723 homicides and other fatal shootings so far in 2021, according to new data compiled and released by the Gun Violence Archive. And speaking of gun violence, 2 are injured in a Virginia high school shooting at Heritage High School in Newport News, Virginia. The governor, Ralph Northam, thanked first responders for their heroic work after a school shooting there. Police chief said 2 17-year-old students, a boy and a girl, were shot, and both are expected to survive, according to the USA Today. The chief said the boy was shot in the side of the face and the girl was shot in the leg. Both were hospitalized. Non-life-threatening injuries, as was a student injured as people ran from the school, and another who had an asthma attack. The suspected shooter was taken into custody off campus around 2 hours after the shooting. The chief said the suspect is a teenage boy who knew both victims before the shooting. And here's a story I'm just reading because Pete Coe will probably make a jingle out of it for tomorrow's show. The headline is Dozens of Penguins Stung to Death by Bees. 63 endangered African penguins were found Friday on a South African beach. Yikes. The penguins are all stung on their flippers near their eyes. All right, I can't read this story, but you know it's going to become a jingle. In France, a guy walked nearly 2,000 feet on a tight wire, a slack line, more than 225 feet above the ground from the Eiffel Tower across the Seine River. 27-year-old acrobat practiced for 4 years to make the journey. His name is Nathan Pauline, and he's, I'm just looking, he's absolutely crazy. That's the deal. All right, well, that is your news dump for Tuesday, the 21st of September, 2021. The 21st, 2021, how about that? And it is brought to you by GiveWell, givewell.org/standup. You want to donate money? a few bucks, hopefully a recurring donation to an amazing organization that is going to make your money go the furthest and save lives the most. Go to givewell.org/standup right now. All right, well, I have two amazing guests joining me today. Very excited about both of them and the conversations I had with both of them. My favorite nature writer, the author of Last Child in the Woods, founder of Children in Nature Network, an amazing nonprofit which I've been supporting for years. Actually, GiveWell and Children in Nature are two of my favorite nonprofits, as well as Kagano, our friend Nick DiFabrizio's organization that he supports so much. So, three great organizations. Anyway, Rich Louv coming up. But first, I have an amazing conversation with Celeste Headlee. Celeste is a longtime NPR host. That's where we met because her show at WNYC was being carried at SiriusXM, and that's where I met her. And then I'll never forget listening to her and being really impressed. And then I was listening to NPR a year later, and I heard this host, and I was like, wow, this person's really good. And guess what? It was Celeste Headlee. She's an award-winning journalist, a speaker, and author, written 3 books now. Her new book is what we're talking about today. It's called Speaking of Race. It's going to be released in November 2021. And you've got to get her other books as well. We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matter and Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. She is an expert in conversation, human nature, and just an amazing journalist who does great interviews. She's been a regular guest host in NPR, American Public Media, for years. Her TEDx Talk is really great. You should see that. And I don't know, I could just say so many great things about Celeste Headlee. You should follow her on Twitter. Everything of Celeste is in the show notes. So let's do it right now with, I think, just a fantastic conversation that you're really going to love. How to talk about racism. Celeste, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you. You know I'm a super fan, and I'm so excited about this new book. It is this is the book for me specifically because not only should everybody be having these conversations, but I like to have them and tape them and share them with people. And because, I've got a public person, these people, I can find folks. So it's so helpful reading this book. It's so important for everybody. Congratulations. It must have been as hard as the other two.
Thanks. Yeah, this was the hardest book I've written. I think because of the subject matter and because it was so emotionally tiring, it kind of wrecked me. Yeah, I didn't want to write it at first. My publisher from HarperCollins said, whose voice we need to hear on How to Talk About Race is Celeste's. And I said, nope. Not doing that.
That's interesting. I have to ask you why, because my idea was that you pitched this book because you're the perfect person to write this book.
No, my editor pitched it to me saying, you're the perfect person to write this. And I wanted nothing to do with it. Anytime you write a book about race, 50% of the people are going to hate it. There's another part of it, which is that when you write the book, you're going to spend at least the following year, if not years to come, talking about it, which means I'm setting myself up to be talking about race, not just race, but my own race and my own racial identity for years to come. That's tough. And there's also, I'm going to be completely and totally frank with you. Once you, sort of publicly make racial conversations or racial identity part of your professional expertise, you tend to get narrowed down to just that. Like, when I was working for NPR as their backup host, as soon as I became known that I was Black and I could host Tell Me More, which was the Black show, I didn't host any other shows. I stopped getting invited to host anything else. So there was a lot of complicated things going on. But, I've read so many books on that are how to talk about race, and so many good ones. But they're not actually how you talk about it. They're like, here's what to say when you're talking about it. Like, here's the context. Here's the history. Here's what privilege means. Here's what, et cetera, et cetera. Super useful, great scholarship. But the book that I felt was missing was let me just walk you through the entire conversation. Oh, you're starting to feel defensive. Here's what you do about that. Oops, you've made a mistake. Here's what you do about that. And so I just wanted a guide that step by step walked people through and it prepared them to make mistakes.
Well, I understand all that, and those are all, really fair concerns. I certainly understand the idea of being pigeonholed as this person or that person, especially because you've been covering pretty much everything for such a long time, and your last book is really original, Do Nothing. I mean, it's about lifestyle. It's about self-improvement, self-help in a way, and it's personal and it's great. And so I get that. But let me start by asking you to kind of help me understand. This is obviously your opinion, but the framing of where we're at as a country, because the way I've been putting it, last summer, 2020, we had George Floyd and everybody saw this video. And I just heard from so many of the whites. And the whites are telling me, I'm curious, I want to be better. And then all these books started flying off the bookshelves. Isabel Wilkerson's Cast and Ibram Kendi's work and Michelle Alexander's work. And people wanted to get enlightened. They wanted to get, dare I say, woke. And now one summer later, I'm at my Board of Education meeting, and they're screaming about CRT being taught in the schools and even diversity and inclusion being taught in the schools. So the way I see it, it's like, not unlike other things in this country, we overshot. That's not a good way of saying it, but we were, it was so inspiring and hopeful to see people wanting to be curious. And now there's been like a backlash to that. That's the way I'm framing it. You may completely throw that out or reframe it. So the question is kind of where we're at when it comes to talking about, thinking about, learning about, teaching about race and history. Oh, the other thing, patriotic history. We have to teach this kind of history, the whole anti-1619 project. So
to my mind, there's three main things going on here. And I agree that the first one is the backlash always happens and it's inevitable. Every single time you see a movement forward in terms of civil rights or racial equity, racial amity, there's always a backlash, always. And it's not just from overtly racist people. No. The second thing is that there is a phenomenon that's been very, very well established and researched by psychologists and sociologists, that it's the reason why standard DEI training doesn't work, which is that when someone does something that makes them feel they are safe racially on racial ground, it makes them more likely to be discriminatory and biased afterwards. So, for example, they have shown that in some cases when people go through DEI training at work, there's a higher likelihood of discriminatory acts following that training. Or, for example, one group of researchers ran a test in which they in the questionnaire before the test, they gave some people the opportunity to endorse Obama or to say, yes, I voted for Obama. Those people were much more likely to make racist decisions if they were given the opportunity. Meaning they were like, well, I voted for Obama. I can't possibly be racist. And therefore, when I make this decision that favors white people, it's okay. It's not racist. The last part of this is that educating yourself about race is awesome and necessary, but it's just the homework. And that's like trying to learn how to swim by watching videos on swimming and never getting in the pool. You can do all the homework that you want, but unless you get out there and start having these conversations, you're not doing it.
Yeah, I think that I grew up, I don't know how I grew up. I wanted to talk more about how you grew up because you write about it in this book so eloquently, which must have been really challenging for you to go back into your past and think about it. But I grew up with, my mom was a city school teacher and we had mixed race. My aunt married 2 black men. We had 2 cousins. And I guess I was just exposed to it a little bit more growing up. I grew up in an all white town. But then when I went to college, I was like immersed in this black group. And that's where I really learned because I'd never been around a lot of black people, not on a regular basis. And so it wasn't about reading anything or as you're talking about learning from books. It was about just living at college around diversity. And the same is true of Jewish folks and gay folks. I hadn't been exposed to that. And then I moved to New York City and then I started reading the books and so on. But I feel like if you're not mixing at work and having or anywhere in life and having personal conversations, it's really hard to just learn things in a book. You have to be comfortable talking to people with more diverse backgrounds than the one you know, and that's hard. And we choose not to because it's hard. Like, we don't go to the same places. We don't sit at the same lunch tables. There's so much self-segregation, in my opinion.
I mean, that's very natural. It's human nature to congregate with the people who look like us and sound like us and have similar experiences. That's what our lizard brain thinks of as safety. On the other hand, the only thing that we know of that really changes people's mind is when an empathic bond is formed.
Yes.
So short of having those conversations and finding commonalities and going, oh, this person actually isn't that scary. And I don't just mean a black person or an Asian American person or any person of color. I mean a person of color talking to a white person, which can be very scary. And I'm hoping that one of the things that white people are working on is becoming easier and less scary to talk to. So not immediately becoming defensive, not trying to prove how unracist you are, not making it about you and your hurt feelings, but allowing that conversation to be a safe and welcoming and empathic space to have discussions, an honest space. So, yeah, people aren't sort of making that step to really learning about other people, but it's because they're not actually really talking to other people.
Before I get into some more of the specifics of the book, which I'm hoping the rest of our conversation will be, just one more general question. What are white people so angry about when it comes to this conversation? Like, why are we so angry?
So not being a white person, so one of the best explanations I've ever heard of this is from Tim Wise.
Yeah. He joins me regularly here on the show.
Who is great.
Yeah.
And he did this speech. In fact, he's repeated, the same basic thing a few times, in which he describes sort of the white experience in the United States and having been told, as the capitalist system here sucked away all profits toward the top range of the income earners, you're left with most people being losers on the wealth scale, right? But if you're white, you were promised that whole time that no matter what, you would not be at the bottom. You would always have people that were worse off than you. There was always people you could order around. You would always have some power. And imagine if that's the promise that was made to you, and this is something that you accepted even subconsciously.
Yeah. Mostly, probably, even.
Yeah, probably mostly. That this was always the promise of America. And then all of a sudden, Barack Obama comes around, and it's not true anymore. A black guy is the president, the highest office in the United States, which means that underlying assumption of the United States, which is essentially white supremacist. But again, we're talking about unconscious bias. We're talking about these unspoken rules that is pulled away from you. And it makes you sort of look around and go, wait a second, he's better off than I am. And I'm never supposed to be at the bottom. And here I am at the bottom. That explanation, I thought, was excellent from Tim Wise. And it's what I point to all the time to help explain. Not excuse, but explain.
Yeah, really, that's a really great answer. All right. So why is this book really important for everybody to read? Not everybody wants to have this conversation, but you have some really good, I think, reasons as to why a book like this is great for not only someone like me that wants to interview folks and learn and help others learn along the way, but for everybody, because their friends, their family, their life. Why is it a good utility, this book, for everybody?
Yeah, it's definitely for everyone, because I go to some pains to explain why everybody has to have the conversation. I try to diffuse the common fears and pushback that I often get from people who don't want to have the conversation, right? I try to use as many pieces of evidence, both from my personal life, my experience, from science, from history, to explain that not having this conversation broadly between everybody is how we got where we are, and where we are is not good.
Yes. Well, let me ask you about your share with me whatever you want here. I almost don't want to give it away. The book comes out November 2nd. You can pre-order it now, but you talk intimately, and it's so painful to read, about your childhood. I mean, You grew up in California. You were called the N-word. You're very light-skinned. People would never know that you're Jewish as well. You have a fascinating background. Your grandfather is one of the most famous composers ever in this country, and people probably didn't know that. What do you want to share with me? And the only reason I say, because I don't want to give anything away because it's just so good. But in our conversation now, what do you want to share with me about your childhood?
I got to tell you, when I was relaying some of these stories, some of which I've never told anybody else before.
Oh, really?
Including my own family.
Oh, wow.
I've never discussed them. I think that's part of what made this book a little bit difficult was I've decided to sort of jump into this pool in the deep end. But they're things that I have put so far back in my brain. To some extent, they lost a little bit of their emotive power for me. And the reaction when my own agent and my editor first read it, they both said, "Oh my God, I cried." And I was like, "At what? What were you crying about?" And I had to go back through the book and realize, wow, I have buried these things so deeply that I forgot how awful they were. I forgot how this must come across to someone when they're reading it for the first time. And I think that was pretty instructive for me. And again, you say I'm light-skinned. I'm very light-skinned. I mean, people used to call my mom white chocolate. That used to call me mocha latte. So, part of the difficulty of writing, of being as light-skinned as I am, is I constantly had to make this choice whether I was going to try to pass or not. A lot of people, when they meet me, think I'm Dominican. So I literally started to study Spanish just so that when all the Spanish-speaking people asked me for directions, I could help them because they thought I was a Spanish speaker. And so, race is so ever present in our world that I was constantly being asked, what are you? What are you? What are you?
Yeah.
And that brings me to that decision every single time. Do I pretend I'm white? Now, I never did. I never pretended I was white because that is... passing is not, in Black culture, it's not really great to say she's trying to pass.
Yeah.
Very much so. It's like but
it's also, but hold on.
Dishonoring your ancestors.
Yeah, but it's also an easier way to get through life, potentially.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't mean to tell you that. I know it is. I'm guessing it is.
It is.
If you can, but there's you're talking about a certain integrity.
There's a couple things there. Yes, it could be easy, but in the long term, here's what I have found. If white people think that you're white and they eventually discover that you're Black, they get mad at you. They feel betrayed. And it's partly because white people talk differently about race than they do when there's a Black person present.
Yeah. Which is why you have had a really interesting experience in your life, and others, I suppose, that look like you. And I mean, any white person knows, at least if they're paying attention or they care about it, like the kinds of things that get said at white gatherings are crazy. How open and how honest, like people just say things not thinking that you would care, that maybe you're married to a person of color or whatever. And you've had those experiences, as you write, several times, right?
So many times. I can't even tell you. Going to a dinner party, someone makes a joke, and I'll be like, "Hey, by the way," or I remember I worked at a dinner theater in Flagstaff when I was going to school at Northern Arizona University, and it would happen to me all the time because we got tourists from all over the world. So I remember one table, a family that came in, and the dad said, "Hey, why don't you guys play the national anthem?" And I was like, "Well, we don't do that because then everyone would have to stand up and they're eating dinner and we don't do that." He goes, "No, I mean Dixie." And I was like, gonna get another waiter for you. I'm a Black person, so I'm going to get another waiter. And the wife was just mortified. And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm like, I'm going to get another waiter for you." And then there was another really, really nice German couple that just the sweetest ever. I was just in the back in the kitchen talking to everybody how sweet this couple was. And as I'm bringing their check out to them, they said, "Can we ask you a question? How come there's no black people here?" And I was like, "Well, Flagstaff, Arizona, we don't have a lot of black population here." And they said, "Oh, I can't tell you what a relief it is to look around the room and not see all these black faces." And I was like, okay, so I'm black. And I'm 2 generations removed from slavery, so I'm going to let someone else take care of you. And they were like, no, we're not racist. Which I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. "Oh, no, we're not racist." And I was like, you are, and I'm going to get another waiter for you. And they left me like a $50 tip.
Oh, well, then let's do that tomorrow night. Come on back. Bring your racism back if you're gonna pay me for it.
I know.
Well, you also, you have a great, I really love, and I've tried to understand this and say it, but not nearly as articulate as you did. We're all biased, at least, if not racist. You use an example of yourself being at the Apple store and thinking one person was the employee versus the other based on, I guess, somebody was Asian.
The man was South Asian. Yeah.
I did this recently to a friend of mine, and I've talked about this on the podcast, but I went over to my buddy's house, and he was having work done on his deck. And he was talking to a guy when I showed up at his house, and the guy was Hispanic looking to me. And I asked him about the work he was doing. And my buddy goes, "Hey, it's my neighbor." I was like, oh, my God. And my daughter, who witnessed it, goes, "Dad, that was super racist." I was like, "Sure was."
Absolutely.
Yep. But everybody has these biases. And I mean, the other thing I do all the time is confuse people of color for each other to their faces sometimes. I mean, so there's all kinds of bias. And I'm just talking here about black and Hispanic, but Asian, no matter what you are, with women, explain how everybody's biased. Or I don't think you use the word racist, but everybody's biased.
I do use racist because, I mean, there's a lot of different definitions of racist.
Sure.
And to a certain extent, how you define racism differs according to what it is, what's the purpose. Right?
Great. Yep.
So for the purposes of the book, I define racist as someone who makes assumptions about other people, whether they be positive or negative, based on their perceived race. Meaning that if you make an assumption, if you walk into a room of all white people and one Japanese guy, and one of them is a math genius, and you turn to the Japanese guy, that's racist, right? We all have those tendencies, every single one of them.
Yeah.
And we have to confront that because it is not true that black people can't be racist.
Right.
Of course they can. It is not true that women can't be sexist. Of course they can. Look how many times we've been confronted with the idea that gay people can be homophobic. And then sometimes a closeted gay person can be incredibly homophobic. So for the purpose of conversation, everyone's racist. Now, when it comes to things like public policy or issues of disparities, you can't really use that definition because a black person being racist doesn't have the power to harm white people en masse that a white person does in general, right? So that's when you have to bring in that bias plus power equation. But for conversation, we're all racist. We all make assumptions about people based on their perceived race, and we do it without realizing it. Our brains make those shortcuts and jump to that system one thinking and that Daniel Kahneman talked about. And we all do that. I mean, this is the beauty of taking the IAT test, the Harvard design test that measures implicit associations, is because it makes you aware, not just there, because there's lots of different tests to take. It's going to test whether you make assumptions about people based on their age, based on whether they're trans or not, based on their gender, etc. And we all make them.
Yeah, I wish I had a bell sound effect. Ding! For each one of them, for me, for sure. Yeah. And you told me in one of the books you write, not necessarily do this in an interview, but I'm going to break the rule because I think it's funny and it illustrates the example, which is when I'm at an all-black wedding right after college, and this is all on my stand-up act now, and lots of people. I was one of the groomsmen, was wearing a big oversized purple suit, and one of like a few of the people at the wedding asked me to bring them a drink. They thought I was a waiter. It didn't bother me as per what you're saying earlier. It didn't feel like it was punching down, but it was interesting to be like, no, I'm in the wedding. Did you not see me at the church? Anyway, But I think people can experience those. And the other thing is, though, being called a name like honky or cracker, like it can't bother me. That doesn't bother me. Although I did have an experience where a black woman started screaming at me like, "I'm not going to listen to you. You're a white man." And I was like, I want to be like, I'm on your side and say all these, but that did bother me. And so, but those are examples of, but you're saying about, anybody can be racist regardless of their background against each other or other people from other backgrounds.
Pretty much everyone is racist. Yeah. And, I hate to bring Louis C.K. into any conversation, but he does have this great bit about, it's so great to be a white dude. He says, you can't even hurt my feelings.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. Yes. Not on that one, really. I mean, you can, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's difficult. And in the end, it's only hurt feelings. Whereas for people of color, it's not just hurt feelings. It's actual, often physical harm and definitely economic harm and harm in the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I was just going to say that what you're talking about is finding common experiences where you had even a taste of what it must feel like. And that's important. I mean, that's not just not to be diminished. That's actually crucial when you go in. There's two steps to that, of course. That's like, do I have any experiences that might help me understand? And B, how much worse must it be for them than that? This was difficult for me. This was a little upsetting for me. So how much worse must it be for this other person?
It's such an important point. You have this, I cannot find it, this really great quote about empathy at the beginning of one of these chapters, and you already kind of mentioned it, but that's exactly what you're talking about, is understanding how other people feel by having some kind of experience yourself. And so often we basically don't have them, or if we do, we don't recognize that we're having them because maybe we just don't have that kind of empathy innately. I don't know.
There's this tendency to especially among white people. I'm not white, so I'm not going to use the phrase "the whites."
No, I use the whites.
That's for you guys.
That's me.
Yep, that's for you guys.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, I had a friend who was very, very white, like Irish white, and she used to always, every time there would be some crazy headline in the newspaper, she'd say, "The whites, they're at it again."
I think I honestly use it for comedic effect. I think it's hilarious, and because forever white people have been saying the blacks. with not even thinking for 1 second that it's not probably the greatest way to describe folks. So I love the whites, and I will not stop using it no matter what you tell me to do. Go ahead.
No, I also think it's funny, but I won't use it. In any case, there is this feeling on many white people that they're open to these conversations, but as soon as something begins to make them feel like they're being compared negatively in terms of suffering, they almost immediately react. And they usually react in a few ways. One is by distancing themselves. Yep. That's not me, that's other white people.
Right.
Another one is to then claim that their experience has been harder than it is. They've even shown this in research studies, right? They would have somebody say, how was your childhood? Good, blah, 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 all the way down the scale. And they'd pretty much all describe their childhood as pretty good. But if they were then had a conversation with a person of color first and then were asked, they described their childhood as difficult.
Yeah.
Because they want to prove that they've suffered too.
Yeah, well, I think that's such an important point, and if you get into that in the book, I'm looking forward to getting that part. But I've certainly noticed that in the last couple of years that I've done that. White folks feel like you're discounting their suffering. Everybody has suffering. Some people have horrific adversity and suffering. I'm talking only about white people. Every one of us has horrific suffering, and if we act like you didn't suffer, like you're privileged, people get really and understandably upset. I'm privileged. My mom died when I was this. I lost my job. I got a disease. Like, of course they feel that way. And I think it's really important to recognize everybody's suffering.
This is the thing that people don't understand about privilege. I wrote a blog about my own privilege and how privileged I am. But first I went through the case of here's how shitty my life was, right? Here's all the crap that has happened to me, and it's not pretty. but here's all the ways in which I have it better than somebody else.
Right.
So it's like that second step of, wow, things have been tough for me. How much worse would it be were I differently abled? How much worse would it be if I were autistic? What if I were visibly dark skinned, not just black, but like blackety black, right? What if I had Asian features and everyone assumed I was an immigrant? What if my English were not perfect? I mean, how would have made all of that stuff harder? And it would have. I don't know how if people are being honest with themselves, they can't think that whatever they've suffered, and as you say, life is hard. As Buddha would say, life is suffering, right?
Yeah, bastard. He's right.
Yeah, absolutely right. But it might have been worse, and worse based on not the choices you made or the mistakes you made, but just how you were born.
Absolutely. So well said. We've only got like a couple more minutes, and I just want to make sure, and hopefully we'll talk again.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah, about how to do it, how to have the conversation. That's what I'm most interested in. Like, I have these conversations, I'm trying to at least a lot, and every time listeners are like, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you do this? And they're right. They're always right. I want to have the best conversation I can. But what should the goal be for me or for other people talking with their friends, their family members about their bigotry? Like, what's the goal? Is the goal to change their mind? Is the goal to enlighten them? Where do we start with our intention?
So your goal is neither to enlighten them nor change their mind, but to be enlightened. That's the goal. You won't change their mind, and you have no control over whether they're enlightened or not. Your goal is to create an empathic bond and learn something new about them and about their views on race. Now, whether they learn something from you, they very well might, especially if you create that bond, but you can't control it.
I feel like I already know about them.
Right. Yeah. We all, the smarter you are, the more likely you are to assume that you know what someone's going to say. That is the truth.
Yeah.
Which is why when you study it, the smarter people are more likely to be bad conversationalists.
Yep. I think I've gotten a little better at it, but only recently. So how do we do it? It seems like you suggest, I've just only gotten into it, but like, and I think this is pretty dead on from my experience, asking questions, not preaching, and not even necessarily giving them the research, the facts, or the best arguments, but asking them questions about why they think or feel the way they do.
Yeah, there's some really encouraging research that shows there is a chance to make someone question themselves if you force them to think through their entire argument, which is why I sort of want to bring it back to some of this studies of rhetoric, which almost nobody studies anymore. But for centuries, for millennia, human beings have studied the ethics and the structure, the craft of argument, right? Going back to Sophocles.
Yeah.
We rarely think about ethics in a conversation, by the way, but we really should. But in terms of an argument and rhetoric, forcing them to walk through their entire opinion and say, if so, then what? If so, then what? And there's very current research showing that when you force someone to walk through and explain their ideas like that, they will question themselves. You don't have to question them. They'll question themselves because they struggle to make those connections and explain it as a cogent argument.
I'm just worried about embarrassing them and losing them.
Oh, but if it all comes out of curiosity.
Genuine curiosity.
Yeah, genuine curiosity. This goes back to that goal, right? If you're doing this as sort of
gotcha.
Yeah, an act in order to prove them wrong, it will not work, and you can't fake it.
I will pay you to listen to my conversations and tell me what I'm doing wrong and how to be better. I want to hire you as a consultant because this book is the coursework. It really is, and so. I am so excited to talk to you again when I'm done with it and when I have some more of these conversations. And I'm just like beyond excited to apply what I'm learning in this book. It's like I'm getting emotional talking about it, much less reading it, because there's so many answers in here, so much of what I want to know and be better at in this book. And I'm so excited to finish it and to talk to you again when I do. Congratulations. As you said, I know this was really personally challenging. I hope it doesn't, necessarily typecast you or pigeonhole you into this. And yet, for your sake, and yet I kind of hope it does for our sake, because I can't stop thinking about it and listening to you talk about it. Congrats, and please join us again soon.
Thanks, Pete. I love talking to you. I'll talk to you anytime.
Yes, one of my all-time favorites right there, Celeste Headlee. I really hope you enjoyed our conversation. I hope that you will go pre-order her book. The links are in the show notes. Speaking of race, why everybody needs to talk about racism and how to do it, comes out in hardcover November 2nd. I've got the advanced copy. It is so good. And go follow Celeste on Twitter. And please let her know that you heard her right here on Stand Up, because that's always a great way to encourage her to come back, even though you did just hear her say that she would love to talk to me anytime. Celeste Headlee on Twitter. And now it's time to get to my second guest of today's show. I love this guy. He is an award-winning journalist and author of 10 books, including most recently Our Wild Calling, How Connecting with Animals Can Transform Our Lives and Save Theirs. And, of course, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder, as well as The Nature Principle, Reconnecting with Life in a Virtual Age, and, of course, Vitamin N, which we begin our conversation talking about, the essential guide to a nature-rich life. He is, of course, where I got the Vitamin N idea, which is included in every single post and email that subscribers get. There's a picture of Vitamin N taken by a listener. Send them my way. All right, here's my most recent conversation with Rich Louv. Follow him on Twitter at Rich Louv, and here we go. Okay, here we go with one of my favorite writers of all time, a mentor, and someone who I consider a personal friend. Richard Louv, great to have you back on the podcast. Thank you for joining me. So much to talk with you about, and I'm glad you made time, because everybody's going to be excited that you're here.
Thanks, Pete. It's always good to talk to you.
I haven't given, official proper, I have in many different ways, but I just want to on the record. This is Vitamin N. This is the book, ladies and gentlemen. I post Vitamin N every day for stand-up subscribers. Listeners send a photo, and the only rule, Rich, is that it can have no man-made objects in it. And I post it every day, and listeners get it. But I think you came up with this. As far as I know, Vitamin N is yours. Yes?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how this book and all the different activities that you list and prescribe, 500 ways to enrich the health and happiness of your family and community, have been, integral. What have you heard from readers of yours as to how they've used that during the pandemic and before? Because it was published, I think, a couple of years before the pandemic broke out.
Yeah. Well, first, this, as you know, is a kind of a workbook that followed Last Child in the Woods, because I got so many ideas sent to me by parents and teachers and others about ways to connect to nature. A lot of this is from the people who read Last Child and my other books. One of the most interesting things in terms of how people use the book, it's obviously focused on families, but also on communities, what they can do to connect families to nature. But, I suggest in the foreword that kids can use this too. It's fairly simply written, and I try to stay away from those big words like mayonnaise. And and I've heard a lot of parents have told me that their kids take the book and then they start telling the parents, they go through and they tell the parents, this is what we're going to do this week or this weekend. We're going to do 5 of these. And the parents say, no, we can't do 5. That's, we're doing it. But I hear that a lot, and I think that's terrific. I love when I hear the kids are using this to tell their parents what to do.
Yeah, it's good for anybody. It's good for adults, it's good for families, but it's definitely good for families, especially with young kids, because, that is a lot of the thrust of a lot of your work. And, of course, the organization that you created, the Children in Nature Network, the idea that introducing kids to nature and keeping them connected to nature when they're very young is pretty much the most important thing we can do for so many different reasons, from fighting climate change to just helping develop a young person, teaching them the importance of nature, which you've written so much about. And even if people have never read your writing, I think they've probably certainly experienced how much of an elixir it is, how important it is in the last 2 years. So let's talk about that. Why is it so important that kids are connected to or introduced to nature at the beginning? Those of us who grew up with it, I think, probably take it for granted to some extent.
There's a body of evidence that was coming out in 2005 when I wrote and published Last Child in the Woods. about the benefits of nature to health, mental health, physical health, cognitive functioning, all of that. Until then, the effect of nature experience on child development and on human development throughout our lives had pretty much been ignored by the academic world. There were a few great pioneers working on that. But something so large, I think of this as literally the elephant in the room. Something so large as how nature affects brain development and psychological health and all that had been skipped over. Since then, if you go to the Children of Nature Network website, which is childrenofnature.org, you'll see a section of research, a research library that we've put together. It's free to anybody in the world, of abstracts and links to over 1,000 studies. So there's been a real growth. This has become kind of a growth industry of research on the effect. And they all point in the same direction with different permutations. But basically, this is showing more and more that this is fundamental, not only to child development, but to your development and mind throughout our lives, including brain development. But that's another, the development of brain architecture, that's another issue. In addition to the effects that come to us that I think are essential because of who we are biologically. We need nature. We need more nature. Obviously, we're part of nature too, but we need that connection. There's also the issue of, particularly crucial right now, is how do you do something to stop the destruction of something if you don't love that something? If you're not deeply connected to it, who cares, about climate change if you don't have a deep connection to nature? Now, maybe you could care based on, the number of sales of water features in your backyard. Maybe you could have an economic level of caring, but I think this is an emotional thing primarily. When the Australian fires occurred, remember that in 2019,
yeah.
And Australia is just very much like California now.
Yep.
But it was bigger even in Australia. And you saw those images of people running into the fire who had just lost their house. And they were taking water and food to wildlife, to koalas climbing up people's knee for the water bottle. Those were incredibly moving images. That speaks well of our species. And there's not a lot lately that speaks well of our species. And there's a eco-philosopher in Australia, Glenn Albrecht, who I really admire and know. He points out that, what's it going to take for us to act? We've got all the data, and this is something I've said before too, which is data isn't doing it. Yes, we need more scientific studies, but making the argument based only on data is not making knowledge turn into change very fast.
Right.
So what's missing? I think there's two things. Glenn says love is missing. All of the big social movements that seem to have moved from knowledge to action, gay rights, gay marriage, feminism, a long series of civil rights to a degree, have all been based on one thing primarily, which is relationship, love, how we treat each other.
Empathy,
yeah. And that's been missing in environmentalism in terms of our relationship with the rest of nature. The second thing that I made the argument is that the element that's missing is what I call imaginative hope, which is not just hope for hope's sake, but being able to visualize a world that is better, that is not just sustainable. I mean, William McDonald likes to say, do you really want a sustainable marriage? Don't you want something better than that? And it's the same with our relationship with the future. Don't we want something better than just survivable? And we won't get survivable unless we raise the bar higher than survival.
So you've written many times, especially I remember most specifically in Last Child in the Woods, you talk about how technology develops so fast, so many new things happening. The more technology we have, the more nature we need. And it's interesting because you wrote that book several years ago now, but, the iPhone has only gotten better, Rich. I mean, I don't know if you watch TikTok, but that shit is addictive. Like, I can't stop watching that TikTok. And The other day, I see my daughter walking up the street, gets off the bus, walking up the street, never lifted her face out of that phone. I'm sure she was looking at it the whole way on the bus, and they're always in it because it's awesome. We were driving home one night, full moon. It was giant, like one of those moons, whatever they call them, that it looked, like it was seen from Star Wars or something. It looked like a whole nother planet, really big, giant, and I kept pointing it out. And my younger daughter's like, what's the big deal? It's just the moon. So I pulled the car over and I hit her. But, you got to teach your kids right, Rich. I hit her with the moon, I should say, because we almost ran into it. The point being, the phone gets better and better. The technology gets better and better. All those algorithms, all of those apps addict us more and more, including myself, meaning that's how much more we need nature. So pick it up from there in terms of how much it's developed and only gotten better since you started writing about this, the research and the discoveries around how much technology we have versus how much nature we need.
Yeah, when I wrote Last Child, we were still on beepers.
Yeah.
And, So, it has improved, and I think it's important for adults to fess up that we're addicted to.
Yes.
Not be all judgmental and all that. And I make a real effort not to demonize electronics, video games and iPhones and stuff. Partly it's a practical matter. The minute adults start demonizing anything, kids want more of it.
Mm.
And I'm addicted to Instagram.
Oh yeah.
I can't sleep. I look at dog videos and cat videos and other animal videos. So I understand that, but I think that something else is happening alongside the growing sophistication of our devices and the growing addiction that we do have to them. I think the younger people are, the less enamored or less impressed they are with electronics. They may spend a lot of time on them. But I like to tell the story sometimes of my grandmother when I was 4 or so. I remember her walking through Independence, Missouri with me in hand, and she would stop in her tracks and I'd lurch. And I remember this vividly. She'd look up and she'd point up in the sky. She says, Richie, look up there. What? It's an aeroplane. Now, my grandmother was born in the 19th century. To her, aeroplanes were new. They were cool. And every time you saw one, it was an event. To me, to you, what's that noise up there again?
Yeah.
It's not cool. So I think that technology, iPhones and all of that, they're becoming part of the, Marshall McLuhan said that television was not so much entertainment as it was like the curtains. It's always there.
Right.
It's always on in the background.
Right.
Well, this stuff is always on in the background. So if people are, and I've talked to kids who, they spend a lot of time on that, but what's really novel, what's really new to them that they've not experienced much of is nature. And when they start to see that as filled with media, filled with images and sounds and senses that you don't even know that you have, that you can use in nature, it's the ultimate internet.
I want to ask you about your most recent post at childrenandnature.org titled Learning Outdoors, Keeping Students and Teachers Safer, Improving Education, and Bringing Healing During the Pandemic. There's always been schools, K through 12, and certainly in colleges, that have understood the importance or just how much more fun it can be to teach outside. But it's not easy to do always. But now, given the pandemic, it seems to be so much more, hopefully, ubiquitous and utilized. But what do we currently know about how this works, why it works? Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. It's not always easy. But tell me a little bit about kind of the history of teaching students outside. There's a whole bunch of schools, of course, in certain parts of the country that are centered around this, but not many, and how it has changed during the pandemic, where more mainstream schools have said, you know what, why don't we go outside? What's the history and what's the present of learning outside?
Well, it's not changed anywhere near as much as it should have during the pandemic. I wrote a piece in my Psychology Today blog. I wrote a piece about my brother a year ago. My brother's a high school teacher in Eureka, California. When he went back into school, was told to go back to school, he walked into a school in August, a year ago, where the desks were 3 feet apart. There was no, I don't believe there was a requirement for masks. He had between his desk and the kids, the school had put up a shower curtain that you could see through. And there was very little there was no talk about going outside. That's Eureka, California, filled with nature. That was beyond the thinking. That's true of not just his school, but most schools. It's a nice idea that a lot of educators will say that's a nice idea, and then they don't do it. And there's reasons for that. A lot of it is structural. Schools have become so politicized, not only in the kind of Trump versus Biden politics, but also politicized among other institutions and networks within their own community. They're all competing. The parks are competing with the schools, competing with other institutions and bureaucracies. And so just try to move that very fast. That's true of public schools, obviously less true of private schools.
Right.
So there's been hardly at all. So the new piece, I look at that, we should have made way more progress on this in a year. We know better now. We knew better in 1915 during the tuberculosis epidemic, when schools in New York City took their kids outdoors on the tops of high-rise buildings, skyscrapers, for their classes because of social distancing. And then somehow we forget these things. And so, yes, it's a great idea. More schools are probably doing it now, but are enough? I don't think so. We need to push on that.
What could be done about that? I mean, I don't want to bore anybody, but I mean, there are policy solutions to this. There needs to be resources. There needs to be investment. There needs to be motivation, incentives. There needs to be research. But I mean, I almost wonder if I talked to one of my daughter's teachers today and asked her, have you ever thought about going outside? They'd either say, I haven't, I have, or we can't.
Yeah. Well, you said the word there, resources. I mean, this is one of the problems over the last year. There are a lot of good ideas on how to deal with COVID in education, but where are the resources to help the schools do that? Now, some of that may be coming, but certainly during the last year, there was very little. So we're asking schools to solve huge problems of the society, and we're not giving them the resources to do it. So a mindset sets in, no risk. There might be liability involved, et cetera. Don't want to be around lawyers for that. Where I live, the high school opened last year, no mask requirement. It's a small town east of San Diego. I know the folks who run a big camp here. It's a 100-year-old camp for kids. And the guy who runs it sent a letter to the school district here in Julian and said, we got a big camp right down the hill from you. It's a 5-minute drive at most. You can walk to it. You can come down here. Our camp is not being used much by the school district in San Diego. It's here. We've got places for outdoor classrooms and things to do. He has yet to hear from the school district.
Oh.
To me, I had a stake in this, a personal stake in my brother. My brother is 65, about to turn 66. He's vulnerable. He's had heart problems. Fortunately, he got vaccinated, but he still goes into the classroom where they're cheek and jowl with each other. They've done some good things to change the schedule around and other things, but outdoor classrooms are still not an issue that they consider.
Can you teach math outside in the dead of winter?
Well, Finland does it pretty well. Finland is at the top or near the top every year in the world in terms of the countries in math and science scores. And this gets pretty cold in Finland. But they have a pattern where it's, it depends on the school, but basically 45 minutes of class, then they go outside for 15 or 20 minutes and run around, often on a natural play space, in a natural play space. Then they come back in and they do another 45 minutes. Then they go back out, then they come back in. They credit this connection to nature in the natural play space as part of the reason these kids do so well in math and science. So it's possible. Yes, it's difficult, but there's a saying in Scandinavia that there's no bad weather, just wrong clothes.
I hated school because I hated sitting there. It's the only reason. I loved school because I loved people. I loved girls. I loved sports. I loved being in class because it was an audience, Rich, you know me. But I didn't like the idea of having to sit there and learn. And people learn different ways. I couldn't sit there. I couldn't sit still and learn. And I don't even think it was ADD. People always are so easy to go to that. I think I just didn't like that. I can learn in many different ways. I learn all kinds of different ways. I learn best in a conversation like this, listening to somebody that I've chosen to talk to. But I don't like certain subjects. I don't want to be forced into learning something. But, we're not going to blow up our education system so quickly and teach all Montessori style. The point I'm trying to make is sitting at a desk and watching a teacher and listening bored the shit out of me. It still does. I would think teachers, and certainly, science teachers and teachers that are teaching lessons that, have to do with nature are more increasingly going to take their kids outside. But how much do we know about how kids learn sitting in that classroom versus any other kind of unorthodox way?
Well, first, one thing's for sure, Pete, it's good that no teachers had both of us in the same class.
What would have happened?
Well, I was like you. I was staring out the window all the time at the trees. Recess, I disappeared. I went down to the hedge or where the woods began, and I looked for ringneck snakes under the bushes and brought them back.
I showed off. I during recess, I showed off for girls with death-defying feats, and almost always embarrassed myself with an injury.
Yep.
Watch me jump off the swing set. There goes my elbow.
Yeah. No, the whole thing is see if you can go over the top.
I tried it.
You can't, and then jump out.
Yeah.
You did that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
on asphalt.
Yeah, even worse. Yes, we didn't have these padded playgrounds.
Yeah, sometimes asphalt didn't work out.
No, sir.
The landing. We already know that kids learn in different ways, and going outside in nature isn't for every kid. Neither is sitting in that cubicle under protective house arrest. That's not for every kid either.
Right.
I often have teachers, and I love teachers. My brother, as I said, is one. And I've met a lot of them in the last few years. And a couple things. One is that often after I've given a speech, a teacher will walk up, one or two, and say, I'm still getting my kids outdoors. And I've been doing that for 15, 20 years, long before Last Child in the Woods came out. And I'm going to keep doing it, no matter what my principal says. I meet those kind of teachers. I love those guys. I call them natural teachers. We need to honor them. That's one thing we need to do. But I often have teachers come up to me and say, almost with the same exact words, this sentence: the troublemaker in my classroom, when I get the class outdoors into nature, the troublemaker becomes the leader. Not just better behaved, the leader. I hear that all the time. So that makes me wonder about those kids dressed in black in middle school at the back of the classroom.
Yeah.
They're probably on Ritalin, a lot of them. And nothing against Ritalin. Sometimes it's needed. But I think of them sitting back there being wasted in a sense.
Yeah.
Some of those could be our best leaders. And I think that leadership in the future is going to be primarily from the best leadership, primarily from people who have hybrid minds, which means that they have the skills that come from technology, but those are balanced with skills that come from being in nature. senses that are activated that we don't even know we have.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so true. Anybody listening knows this, that when you are anxious and stressed and feeling all kinds of negative feelings and you go out into the woods, something changes. And that is as true of adults as it is of young people. It's just that often adults make that decision more consciously, and younger people don't realize that's what's just happened. But I think a lot of teachers, a lot of school psychologists, et cetera, do understand that and try to advocate for it. But it's got to be scaled up in a way that is actually implemented as part of the program, as opposed to just being in that facility, that building, stuck in that big cinder block building, in that big anodyne cinder block building. It's not helping.
And also, it's not helping the teachers. There's a study done in Canada that found that teachers who get their students outdoors more are far, they don't burn out as fast as the teachers that are trapped in the same classroom.
Sure.
And it's not easy for teachers. A lot of teachers are from the first or second generation that has what I've called nature deficit disorder. They've been disconnected from nature. And so where do they start? They want to do it, a lot of them, but they don't know how. It's one of the reasons why it's going to be really important to incorporate teaching teachers, future teachers, how to take their students outdoors. It doesn't necessarily come naturally.
What do you think in terms of things learned during this pandemic? You've written a bit about this for sure. What have we learned? I mean, it's mostly been horrific for so many different reasons. But what have we learned about ourselves? What have we learned about our connection to nature? It does seem like silver lining. I mean, you can kind of notice anecdotally, the park that you went to pretty regularly usually had a lot of parking spots. But during the pandemic, you couldn't. I remember one day we went to the park that we'd always gone to, and there was no parking. And I was like mad. I was like, this is my park. You can't. I've always been coming here. These people just started coming here. And, you know, the sheriff did not care about that when I tried to illegally park. What have people learned, and will it sustain? What is the silver lining?
One of the surprises, I think, of the pandemic. I wrote a piece for the LA Times about this, that particularly when it comes to a connection with animals, a lot of the talk has been the connection with parks and green space, and we rushed to that. I mean, where I live, the trailheads are jammed with people now that weren't before. You're right. Now, some of that is just logistical. You know, that's a place to go that you can at least walk around. There aren't a lot of people. It's not necessarily all of it an attraction of nature. But deep within that, I think, is a primal yearning that already existed among people for more nature in their lives. Again, that equation you mentioned, the more high-tech our lives get, the more nature we need. Literally, we need it. So the pandemic comes along, and it's a good option. When it comes to the animals, the wild animals around our houses, for example, a lot of people reported, you know, particularly when they were locked indoors, they looked outside and realized there were birds. Some of them paid attention for the first time to these birds. They paid attention for the first time to the possum that waddles past in their backyard, or the coyote that stops and has eye contact with them. And the key to that is people needed comfort. They needed to feel they were not alone. And when you don't have a lot of people around, it helps to have more animals around, whether they're domesticated. You know, you saw the run on shelters. You couldn't find a dog or a cat.
Yeah.
That came from that hunger. That hunger already pre-existed in Our Wild Calling, the new book. I talk about, thank you.
I'm holding it up here.
You saved me from shameless self-promotion. I talk about the species loneliness, which is, we're already very lonely as people, as individuals. That's growing. And it's now known that loneliness, human isolation, causes many of the same diseases, or is connected to many of the same diseases as obesity and smoking, and several other problems. That this is making us sick. The more isolated we are from other people. There are a lot of reasons for this. Many of them happen to be many of the same reasons that disconnect kids from nature.
Right.
And so we're already lonely. And a lot of people want to blame that on electronics and all that. We can only blame Zuckerberg for so many things,
Right.
I think that there's something deeper going on, which in our wild calling, I talk about, which is species loneliness. And as a species, we are desperate not to feel alone in the universe. There's religious implications to that. But why else would we look for Bigfoot? Why else would we, look for intelligent life on other planets when it may not be a good idea to find that? It's because this is part of us. We are desperate not to feel alone in the universe. Along comes a pandemic. Suddenly we're even more alone, separated from other people. Even now, it's not just during the beginning days. Even now, people somehow feel like the enemy when you walk past a big group of them in a city.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be that way, but increasingly for folks, it does feel that way. So now you look out that window, or you look down at your cat or your dog, and you do not feel so alone. The irony is that there is a great conversation going on around us all the time, and that we are not alone in the universe. The more that's known about how animals and plants communicate, the sophistication of that, not only within their own species, but across species and with us, the more we know about that conversation, the more we are aware of that conversation, the less lonely as a species will be, and as individuals.
Yeah, which picks up on something I wanted to ask you. In Our Wild Calling, your latest book, How Connecting with Animals Can Transform Our Lives and Save Theirs. You interview a whole bunch of experts. You tell all kinds of different stories. But one of the people that you talk to is a professor named Patty Bourne-Selley, also an author of several nature-related books. And she or he told you something that you write in this book that you've thought about ever since. Quote, "At the end of your life, your understanding of life will depend on how many lenses you've seen the world through." And that is such a profound statement, because I think we're talking about seeing life through the world of an ant, a dog, or a hawk, or a dolphin, or whatever it might be.
Or also a human being that's not like you in many ways.
Oh, no, I wasn't talking about that.
I mean, all of the above. And we don't usually think of other life forms as a reason for empathy.
Yeah.
We think about people, but it's both. And I love that statement too. I measure my days by that sometimes, which is when you begin to really connect with other life, whether it's human or other, with animals, with wild animals. We know that about therapy animals. They're usually domestic animals, but also wild animals. The ones we encounter. And that book is filled with stories that people told me about encounters they had with other animals that changed them.
Right.
There was something transportive about that moment. And that empathy that we can develop and feel makes our lives much richer. And at the end of our life, as Patty says, we can look back and look at our lives and look at the world and look at life itself through 1,000 lenses instead of just the 2 that we have in our head.
I would ask for a little bit of counseling therapy here from you, which is, as you know, I keep a pretty good garden, and the groundhog has not gotten me this year, but he or she is back, and there may be several. I think there's several, and here I am in my shed every day, which I absolutely love working from, because I'm looking out at my bird feeders, my garden, and nature. And it's just the best work situation you could ask for if you have to be anywhere near computers, screens. And this son of a bitch is right outside my window. And Rich, I am going to say something that I don't feel comfortable with, and I'd love for you to maybe, do a little marriage counseling here. I hate it. I hate that groundhog. And I think people always go to Caddyshack, which I'll just leave that aside. This groundhog terrorizes me, and I know I'm wrong. It's me, not him. He has every right to this spot as I do, but I hate him. And I don't feel that way about any other creature, really, other than all mosquitoes So what advice would you offer to bring us together? And because I really want to kill it. I see it and I want to kill it.
Marriage counseling between you and the groundhog. Not that you're into that kind of thing, but that's a great question. I mean, that's one of the big questions. How do we deal with wolves that take sheep away? Well, they don't do it that much.
Yeah.
You know, it's a great question. You know, the wildlife management is really the answer, not wildlife extermination.
Mm.
And it sounds like you've got a small case that needs wildlife management. What that means, I don't know. Maybe it means moving the groundhog somewhere.
Well, I caught it last year in the humane trap, or just it doesn't. But the trap, it was so fat that I think the trap came down. It killed it. I go and I go, I gotcha, and I ran up on it, and it was. I go, oh! I yelled at, oh, you're playing dead, huh? Yeah, and I was like. And so then I finally took like a skewer and I poked it and it didn't move. I was like, oh dear. Oh dear.
I'm embarrassed. I'm laughing. But...
Oh, it's dead. Oh, I killed it. And then I dropped it off on my Trump loving neighbor's lawn, which I don't suggest to anybody. I don't, but that's what I did. With a knife in it that said, this is you. Okay, that got carried away. But
well, I remember in Jaws where they said we need a bigger boat.
Yes,
we need a bigger trap.
I do. The thing was, well, it had eaten my whole damn garden. That's one reason why I got so big last year. But
that's it. You got Jaws as a groundhog.
When we talk here at the end about, I want to just ask you one more question about Our Wild Calling. Well, really all of your books, because all of your books are, you can always add to them with new research, with new experiences. But what have you heard from readers about this latest book or any of your other work that you'd want to add to a future printing or, to this conversation right now? I always love to hear your stories and things that, you are so good to go around and speak all over the country. You've given talks in every state in the country and all over the world. And now I'm sure virtually everywhere as well, in libraries and bookstores and other organizations. So what have readers shared with you either in recent times that you can share with us?
Well, in terms of Our Wild Calling, now I'm not sure the gopher story counts, but a lot of people have told me great animal stories about great encounters they've had, which do not end in death for the animal. And I never get sick of hearing those stories.
Right, neither do I.
If they're quite violent like yours. No, I never get sick of hearing those stories because there's often times people tell me I'm the first person they told that story to because it just sounds too woo-woo, and they'll be embarrassed if they tell their friends. So they tell me, and they're always great stories. The highest compliment that I've gotten for Our Wild Calling was a few weeks ago. Somebody sent me an email via, I guess, Facebook, and said she couldn't express how important Our Wild Calling was to her mental and spiritual health. She said it was like getting surgery from the inside. Thought, that's pretty good. And, every book I wish was a lot better. Authors are always their worst critics.
Yeah.
This one was a real risk where I took it. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was. Outside Magazine did a profile of me in the book, and wonderful profile. I liked all of it. It gave me way too much credit. And then it said, but, Louv is starting to sound a little new agey.
Uh-oh.
And anybody who knows me, you know me pretty well.
Yeah.
I'm a champion eye roller, and I'm from Kansas originally, so not that matters anymore. But I have to fess up. I mean, doing this book and hearing stories, and I continue to hear them from people about how these encounters and relationships with other life changes them in a way that is difficult to describe. And that's why in the book I call that the habitat of the heart that we are at that point.
Yeah, it's such a great phrase because I think that's because that kind of criticism comes because it's hard. You've always relied on the best research and the best science you can find and referencing that in your work. But this is a really difficult type of issue, the relationship between other living species and human beings to research. You can't research, all this research about, I just saw a study, which I'm sure was bullshit, about squirrels and their different personalities. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But this is not, it's hard to do a randomized controlled study on the relationship between humans and animals. And yet you have so many stories in this book. You mentioned, the one that you just mentioned. I've told you my story about the persistent bumblebee in Sicily. And I think most people probably have a similar anecdote where they witnessed something in nature that affected them so profoundly. It might have either changed the trajectory of their life or just become something that they go back to, like I do that bee on a regular basis. And then once you do that, you, I think, open the door to have more experiences. At least that's been my experience, to look at nature and learn from it, including plants. I mean, we so discount them. That's the other thing. I hate these weeds. I don't like the weeds. They really upset me as well. I get very angry if I go away for a week and the weeds are all over the garden. That also...
That's because they like you, Pete. They're just coming to spend time with you. Right?
Oh, I like that spin. Spin.
Yeah, we'll leave that as a spin. Yeah, this is territory that is, the new age thing made me laugh, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But actually, it's, I don't like to think of it as old age in my case, but it's ancient age, not new age. We've known this as a species forever. We've been storytellers about animals forever. It's one of the places that our species has always found meaning. Our ancestors went out in the forest or the jungle. They came back at the end of the day around the campfire, and they started to tell stories about the encounters they had with animals that day. And sometimes they would dance the story. Sometimes they would become the bear while telling the story at the campfire. This is very old. And one of the things I hope from that book is that people do tell these stories of these encounters to each other. And one of the things I noticed is the more that people told a particular story, the more meaning they found in it. We deprive ourselves of so much meaning in our lives by being too rational at times. And as you know, I do quote a lot of scientists, all for science, but there are questions that go beyond science.
Great way to end it. And I really appreciate every time I get to talk to you on the record, off the record. And I want to say something else. I don't know if you remember this, but after I lost my job, I was terrified and concerned about what was going to become of me. And I called you up asking for some kind of endorsement or approval. And I'll just never forget the way you so kind of flippantly be like, what are you talking about? You're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine. And the truth is, I'm more than fine over a year and a half later. You were right, but I will never forget that phone call and the kind of friend you were and have been to me. So I just wanted to say on the record, I don't think I've told you that off the air, how much I appreciate that, and we'll never forget it. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks, Pete. You're an inspiring guy, and I have one more question for you.
Uh-oh.
When are you going to run for office?
Ha! Well, I was recruited to run for a local town office, and I would have gone for it if it wasn't too late to get my name on the ballot. So I'm thinking in the next round. So maybe in a couple of years from now, we'll see. It's a weird thing. Do you run for office because you have an ambition to? And I thought that maybe I would after I lost the corporate gig and there was an opening in the congressional seat, but then I saw all these other people that were running who were way more qualified than me. This time around in the town, local folks came to me and asked me, which I think is a better way to do it, that other people are asking you. And since that was the case, it seemed more kind of grassroots and more wholesome. So I think I will. But at the same time, if there's someone better, I'll let that person run too. So, it's not about ego. It's about what do you think you can actually accomplish? So we'll see. I don't know. Remains to be seen.
I think you'd be a great politician in addition to what you're already doing, because you have not only humor, but you have empathy. You like talking to people who are not like you.
Yeah.
That's a rare quality that don't agree with you. It's a rare quality, not only in politicians, but in people.
Yeah, you always tell me privately that those are your favorite interviews. And so I want to give you a heads up. As we're talking, I see a message just came in from a guy who I am terrified to talk to, but I'm making it happen because of your encouragement. So that's the next interview. Me and Martin are going to sit down, and this should be real terrifying. So we'll see. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, there he goes, Rich Louv, the great Rich Louv, Children and Nature Network. Go buy all of his books and put them on your library and read them every year. I love talking with him. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I never actually connected with Martin, so still working on that. Hopefully I can talk to him, and I'm going to take a lot of what Celeste Headlee taught me in her new book about how to talk about race and hopefully apply it to that and other conversations. Celeste Headlee, Rich Louv, what a show. Man, thank you very much for supporting it. A lot of work goes into it each and every day. Can't do it without your support, so please sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. That's all I've got for you today. I will talk to you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Hope to see you at the Hangout Thursday. Check out the Discord platform anytime our listeners are chatting about all kinds of different issues. And I will talk to you here on this daily podcast tomorrow. Now get out in nature and send me some photos. Take it away, John Carroll.
Stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand